morning and Hariom to all. We welcome you all to this talk on Silence of Krishna by Sri L. Ramaswamy. We now request Sri Nitin Sridhar to share his thoughts and say a few words about Advaita Academy.
Thank you, Basab. I'm very happy to be here. Welcome you all for this wonderful session on Bhagavad Gita on behalf of Advaita Academy. Srimad Bhagavad Gita is one of the most profound, we can call it as a textbook of Hindu philosophy and practice. And it is rightly considered as the very essence of all the Upanishads, which teaches karma, which teaches bhakti, which teaches jnana. There is something in it for everybody, and it is a very good opportunity for all of us. We should make use of it. That whatever opportunity we get to read Bhagavad Gita, to listen about it, to reflect upon it, we should make use of this. As and the most important point about Bhagavad Gita is it's Upadesha from Bhagavan himself. As Bhagavad Purana notes, Sri Krishna is Bhagavan Swayam. He is not just Amsha Avatara, he is the Bhagavan himself. And another important aspect of Bhagavad Gita is Bhagavan delivers this message on the battlefield, and in a sense, we are all fighting a battle in our day-to-day life, and there is no better guidance, there is no better text that teaches us how to wade through this samsara to slowly walk towards moksha. So for this reason, I am very happy that Advaita Academy is able to collaborate on this event with Vedanta Institute Kolkata, and Sri L. Ramaswamy ji is a very erudite scholar and a personal friend. I have known him for many years. So I'm very happy to be speaking here, to be able to collaborate on this event. Just a brief introduction to Advaita Academy to those who do not know, those who are not aware of about our work. Advaita Academy was started back in 2010 by Sri Harikiran Vadlamani ji. He is an entrepreneur based in Singapore and Hyderabad. And the purpose for starting this academy is basically for the disseminating of the authentic teachings of Advaita Vedanta across the world. We are a video platform, and we have published over the last 10 years around more than 11,000 videos, 11,000 lectures on Bhagavad Gita, on the Upanishads, Brahma Sutra, on the Prakarana Granthas of various Advaita Acharyas, as well as we have more than 1,000 videos dedicated to teaching Sanskrit and on general Hindu texts like Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. This year we conducted a 1-month-long global festival of oneness on the occasion of Shankara Jayanti to celebrate the life and teachings of Adi Shankaracharya Bhagavad Pada, wherein we had invited around 120 Vedanta Acharyas, artists, seekers from across the world to speak, to perform in this online festival. And since September, we have also started doing live programs, curated programs on a weekly basis. We have weekly classes, we have weekend special programs that I curate myself, wherein we have 2 flagship programs during the weekend called Weekend with Wisdom and Weekend Conversations. The Weekend with Wisdom is where we invite various teachers to speak about a topic of Vedanta that particular weekend. It usually either in a 4 hours or 8 hours format. And the weekend conversation is something wherein I interview seekers from across the world, common people working in different fields, but who have been influenced by Vedanta in their lives to know about their life, about their journey. Advaita Academy as a whole is a vertical, is a part of Indic Academy, which is a larger platform with a broader focus for preservation and promotion of Indian culture and civilization. Indic Academy has established many platforms like Advaita Academy. We have other platforms like Indica Yoga. We have iGen Plus for the teenagers. We have Indica Pictures. We have Indic Book Club, Indic Today magazine, etc. Similarly, Indic Academy has established focused thought centers like Center for Soft Power, which is focused on promoting Indian art and culture across the world. We have Inter Gurukula University Center, which kind of acts as a bridge between our traditional Gurukula system of education and the modern university education system. And we have Center for Indigenous Sustainability, so on and so forth. And Indic Academy also gives regular research grants. We fund events, talks, etc. So, with this very brief remarks, I wish the best for the event. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Thank you, Nitinji. A brief profile about today's Sri L. Ramaswamy. Sri L. Ramaswamy is a senior disciple of internationally eminent philosopher and spiritual guide Swami Parthasarathy. He graduated in BCom and ICWAI in Chennai and worked with a leading management consultant firm in Chennai for a period of 2 years. Sri Ramaswamy is also a member of Mensa, an international society of high IQ people. Sri Ramaswamy devoted over 5 years to intense study and research of Vedanta philosophy, the knowledge of life and living, under the guidance of Swami Parthasarathy at Vedanta Academy near Pune, India. During the last 2 years of his study, he also actively engaged in promoting the knowledge at various cities in India and abroad. Presently stationed in the city of Kolkata, India, as a senior alumnus and research scholar of Vedanta Academy since February 2002. Sri Ramaswamy has engaged himself to full-time propagation of knowledge through study classes and discussion groups on Vedanta. He is also the chief events coordinator of Vedanta activities in Kolkata. He has addressed variegated audiences in India and abroad on practical techniques and application of self-management principles based on Vedanta. Some of Sri Ramaswamy's presentations have been to IIT Kharagpur, IIS WBM Kolkata, IIM Shillong, Indian Oil Corporation Haldia, TISCO Jamshedpur, PLS Kolkata, and Medica Kolkata. Please wait for our announcements at the end of the lecture. We now request Sri L. Ramaswamy ji to address us. Thank you.
ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्. On this auspicious occasion, we salute the Guru Parampara from time immemorial till our Guru, as we try to get a glimpse into what this Bhagavad Gita knowledge is all about with reference to the first chapter. As Bashab mentioned, our knowledge is gained from our teacher Swami Parthasarathy, and we are been graduating from Vedanta Academy, various students, and they are engaged themselves in propagation of this Vedanta philosophy all over the world. So our chief inspiration and source of knowledge is Swamiji. Here, I would also like to mention about Mr. Kumar, under whom we worked for 2 years in Chennai in late 90s before we joined the academy. He's a management consultant and also ardent, passionate, a follower of Sanskrit language, and he has written various books, and he works with Sanskrita Bharati and other organizations in promotion of Sanskrit, and an independent thinker. So today's topic, which is Gita and counseling, which is referring to the silence of Krishna, majorly focusing on the first chapter of Gita, is something that we have derived from Kumar sir's article also. So we remember him also with gratitude as we enter the subject. As mentioned by Nitin, Bhagavad Gita forms a very important text in Vedanta philosophy, in Hinduism. There are any number of texts, innumerable texts, but traditionally Prasthanatraya are the canonical 3 great texts which forms the basis of Vedanta are the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutra. So essentially, all other texts also somewhere down the line connect to these texts. So Bhagavad Gita is considered a very, very authoritative text on Vedanta and various aspects of practices of Hinduism also. Great acharyas like Adi Shankaracharya and others have commented on Bhagavad Gita, and some of them have begun their commentary from the 2nd chapter of Gita. 2nd chapter of Gita is the Sankhya Yoga, or it is also called as Jnana Yoga. The highest philosophy is given, and after that, following chapters give various aspects of sadhana. In fact, one of the reasons for this talk is that to create awareness about the annual Gita lecture series of Sunadaji. Sunadaji is daughter disciple of Swamiji, the announcement of which Basha will be making after the talk. So from December 1 to 4, we will be having a talk on Gita 2nd chapter. So even in traditional Gita lectures and discourses, 1st chapter is not taken and expounded in the public as other chapters are done. But definitely 1st chapter is also very much a part of Gita. When Shankaracharya writes in his commentary about who is the Adhikari who can get into the reading of Bhagavad Gita, he mainly focuses on who is known as Atyanta Mumukshus. Atyanta Mumukshus are those who are genuinely desiring for liberation, and to them he addresses at a different level altogether. But as it was said, Bhagavad Gita caters to all of us at all levels. So that is why Madhusudana Saraswati in his invocation to Bhagavad Gita addresses Gita as Amba. Amba means mother. A mother is someone who gives solace to a son, irrespective of whichever position he is, whatever age or stage of life he is. Exactly like that. Bhagavad Gita is a text that anybody can approach. A highly philosophical person who wants to learn Vedanta, a person who is wanting liberation, a person who is at a corporate level trying to do his day-to-day work in the modern world, a housewife or a student who is wanting to learn certain practical techniques, a person who is of devotional nature, who merely wants to even chant Gita. Various people at various levels can approach Gita, and Gita, like a mother, always welcomes all. So if we look at it from that angle, we can say all other yogas, every chapter in Gita is called as a yoga: Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Kshetra Vibhaga Yoga. Various yogas are given. And yoga means, in general, one way to understand it is a union. So that term implies that the individual self is segregated or separated from the Supreme Self. Not really. There is no separation at all. That is the core philosophy of Advaita. But it is apparently segregated, or it appears to be segregated. So any attempt that we make to merge back to the original self is called as yoga. If you look at it this way, then the word religion also makes sense. Read plus ligare is to unite back to the self. So every yoga we can understand as a path that is giving us how to reach the supreme self. But why should Arjuna Vishada Yoga, the yoga of Arjuna's despondency, be part of Bhagavad Gita or be termed as a yoga? So one way, if we look at it, Arjuna's condition in the first chapter is representative of the present nature of a human being, all of us. Arjuna represents all of us, a fallen state. It is only a matter of degree that differs from all of us, but all of us have fallen from the original state of our infinite being and fallen into a state of depression. Or when I say depression, one need not visualize a very pessimistic way of viewing oneself. At various degrees, we do undergo stress and strain in life. It is not that absolute bliss or pleasure is there at all points of time. We go through bouts of depression, and that is characterized by Arjuna, who is one of the key characters there. So, what is the background of Bhagavad Gita? Background of Bhagavad Gita is that there is a tension between the two royal families who are cousins, Pandavas and Kauravas, and wrongly the Pandavas have been cheated by the Kauravas and their kingdom has been taken away. So they are waiting to get back the kingdom. And when all negotiations have failed, when all peace processes have failed, there was no other choice but to confront and get the rightful ownership of the land through the battle only. And it is like a sort of a civil war at that point of time. Almost all kings in the great Bharatavarsha joined this war. Various kings are supporting the Pandava side and various kings are supporting the Kaurava side. All of them assemble in Kurukshetra, and a righteous war is about to be fought. This is the background. Arjuna is well prepared for this battle actually. Okay. But what happens at the 0 hour of the battle? And that is where the background or setting is given, that the Bhagavad Gita philosophy is given. So one of the points, as Nitin covered, is that we are all going through this battle of life on a day-to-day basis. And to overcome, we cannot escape this battle. To overcome this battle, we need that inner strength. And this chaste philosophy of Bhagavad Gita is going to give us that inner strength. This is the setup of the Gita. It is very interesting. You ask most of the people, and they have a reverence, respect for Gita. And why don't you study the Gita, or why don't you get an understanding of it? With all respect also, they will say, I do want to do it, but let me do it after retirement. This will be the common answer. What is interesting is, in other words, what they are saying is, after all my duties and actions and everything is over, with reference to my office, with reference to my family and other things, let my children get married, and then it is only I am going to dedicate myself to only Gita. This is their common refrain. What is interesting in Gita is that Arjuna is wanting to run away from action and Krishna is pulling him back into action. So essentially, Gita is a text that is teaching us how to act in this world. It is ironical that we want to study this text after the action is over. That means after retirement. That cannot be a greater irony than this. So the picturization of Gita in the battlefield itself gives a message that this is a knowledge that is required for us to fight the battle of life. So what happens to Arjuna in first chapter is an interesting lesson with reference to human psychology. If we say the entire Gita, the rest of the 17th chapter is going to give us chaste philosophy, first chapter may not contain a very high philosophy, but it contains enough material for us to understand human psychology. So it is that aspect that we will be seeing today in detail in the time available with us. Yeah. So what is the condition of Arjuna? Condition of Arjuna in chapter 1 and 2. 1 and 2 because in second chapter also for first 10 verses it spills over. Otherwise it is majorly chapter 1. He goes through various transitional phases and various levels at which his emotions take a roller coaster ride. We will see this in detail, but I'm giving the points now. He starts with a very commanding tone. Then there is an emotional breakdown. And then he is overcome with pity and sadness. Then Arjuna gives a lot of theories. Here is the portion where he intellectually justifies whatever stance he has taken. If at all anything that he says with clarity is certain answers, and he is suggesting to Krishna what he must do. If any questions are there, these questions are only rhetorical questions, not genuine questions. This is the answer syndrome that he gets into. Then comes the phase where there is a shift in his mindset, where he is expressing doubts and confusions. Finally, that culminates in the grand words that I don't know. Please save me. And he surrenders. Once he surrenders, he becomes completely silent. These are the phases that Arjuna goes through step by step in the first chapter, and it picturizes how a human being slowly goes through this emotional turmoil. So if you look at it this way, Bhagavad Gita's first chapter talks about the present state of Arjuna, present state of the human being also. The second chapter talks about the original state of human being. That is why second chapter is starting with the highest Brahma Vidya, and the second chapter ends with Sthita Prajna, or the man of steady wisdom. So second chapter is talking about the highest philosophy, in a way essence of Gita. So first chapter is present state, second chapter is original state, third chapter onwards, how do we go from our present state to original state, starting from Karma Yoga, Karma Sannyasa Yoga, all those things are coming, Dhyana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, various yogas are given to bridge the gap between where we are and where we want to reach. So this is one way of looking at how the thought pattern or sequence of chapters are there in Bhagavad Gita. So therefore, in order for us to understand the present state, unless you understand there is a disease, how can medicine be administered? There can be a doctor who has the cure for your disease. But unless otherwise you are aware of the disease, why will you even approach the doctor? So half of the work is done, or rather the most important job is to create that awareness in the student that he has something to correct within himself. Once you have that awareness, you will not rest content till you get yourself corrected. So therefore, first chapter forms an important platform for the rest of Gita. And this is where Krishna does not speak at all. You know, at the end of every chapter, we say Krishna Arjuna Samvade. It's a Krishna Arjuna Samvada. That means conversation or a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. And wherever Krishna speaks, it is prefixed by Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. But you don't find Sri Bhagavan Uvacha in first chapter at all. If at all Krishna says something, it is indirectly reported by Sanjaya as just one word. Krishna only says, look at the Kurus. That's all he says. Nothing else he says. Therefore, whatever Krishna says, his lecture actually begins from second chapter only. Krishna does not open his mouth in the first chapter. That is why we have titled this as Silence of Krishna. But it gives a very interesting analysis as to what Krishna's silence conveys. We can very well come to this conclusion that Krishna's silence is as eloquent, as important, as deep as his words, which comes in the rest of the chapters. So therefore, picturization of first chapter is very important. Introduction of Krishna and Arjuna in the first chapter is, in a white white horse yoke chariot. What is this? Tata Shvetair Hayai Mahati Syandane Stitau Madhava Pandavascheva Divyan Shankar Pradadmatahu. The entry point itself is that a great chariot is there and the white horses are drawing it, and Krishna and Arjuna are there. This is the dhyan, or this is the picture that we must have when we even study the Gita. It invokes a very great feeling, but he only operates as a charioteer. He doesn't open his mouth at all, and as Arjuna commands, he does whatever Arjuna is saying there, and that is where it starts. So here, Arjuna starts first with a commanding tone. He says, place my chariot in between two armies, O Achyuta, that I may see thee standing desirous to fight, with whom all I must fight in this outbreaking battle. So we see that in the initial few verses, only Sanjaya is reporting, Duryodhana is speaking to Drona, and all this is the conversation. And then to infuse enthusiasm in Duryodhana, Bhishmacharya, he blows the conch. And accepting the challenge, Krishna, Arjuna, and all Pandava warriors also blow the conch. And this is what is described in the first few verses. After that, Arjuna begins his talking by saying to Krishna, place my chariot between the two armies. Famous words, Senayor Ubayor Madhye. In fact, this term comes again and again in Gita. Senayor Ubayor Madhye. 3 times it comes. O Achyuta, so that I can see those people who are standing here desirous to fight. So we see here that Arjuna is very clear in his mindset. That battle which he has prepared for 13 long years, he is the one of the principal warriors, commander-in-chief type of a person, and he is saying, take me between the two armies so that I can see who are all I am going to confront. This is the present state of Arjuna. Then what happens? Then he goes into an emotional breakdown. There Partha saw standing fathers, grandfathers, teachers, maternal uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, comrades, fathers-in-law, friends, also in both armies. If you read this verse, it gives a description as though there is going to be a marriage party and a reception is going on and Arjuna is meeting all his friends and relatives. That is not the case. They could be independently his friends and relatives, but having come to the battlefield, they are warriors, they are opposition parties or enemies, and the warriors on his side. That is all must be his vision. But here what happens is that his vision takes a very personal angle. Instead of seeing the warriors, instead of seeing the fighters, he is seeing friends, families, fathers, grandfathers, Matulan, Guru, everybody that he sees. And this is where his emotional breakdown happens. So what is the lesson for us here? Even a stalwart like Arjuna, who is normally a stable person, a level-headed person, when emotions take over his personality, there is a complete collapse here. And that is what is characterized by his physical, symptoms. And his physical symptoms are given in the next 2 verses. He says, my limbs fail and my mouth is parched. My body trembles and my hair stands on end. Gandiva slips from my hand. Gandiva is Arjuna's bow. It slips from my hand. And my skin burns all over. My mind whirls as it were, and I am not able to stand. You can consult the modern psychologists or psychiatrists also. This condition is a psychological nervous breakdown. There is a nervous breakdown that Arjuna experiences. He is completely shaken. Now, let us pause here for a moment and think as to why this is happening. Actions are performed by the body. Body can perform its action properly only when the intellect or your thinking faculty is alert and it is clear. And intellect is the faculty which can guide a human being. That is his strength. But what can cloud the intellect, what can cover the intellect is our emotions. Emotions is a virtue. To have emotions is definitely a virtue. If we don't have emotions, we are like plants or we are like stones. And we are capable of having deeper emotions, because animals also have emotions, we also have emotions, but human beings' emotions can go into greater depths also. So emotions therefore is a virtue. But what we must guard ourselves against, or what we must be careful, is we must not become emotional at every point of time. What is the difference? When emotions uncontrollably take over your personality, when it clouds your decision making and thinking capacity, then you will not be able to decide or act properly. Once you are able to not think properly, your body cannot function properly. Take a very simple example. See, there is a wooden plank that is kept from one end of the room to the other end of the room. A big room, it's a wide plank. It is a strong plank. And we ask all of you to walk on that plank. It will be very easy for everybody to walk. There's no problem at all. If the same wooden plank is kept at the top of the Twin Towers at 100th floor, and the engineers and the architects certify that it is placed very strongly, and the doctors certify that you are also healthy, there is no pressure or giddiness that you have, but still, if you ask a person whether he will be willing to walk on that plank at that height, mostly the answer is no. Why would you not walk? Because immediately when you are at that height, if a fear factor comes, what if I fall? Fear is an emotion. Once this emotion takes over your personality, obviously your thinking is not clear. And once your thinking is not clear, your body will not cooperate. This is exactly what happens to Arjuna here. He was a level-headed person battling, ready for this battle and coming into this battle with a commanding tone. He tells Krishna, please take my chariot in between the armies, where he takes a personal view of seeing my guru, my uncle, my father, my brother-in-law, my brother, my friend. Once this personal angle comes, emotions take over his personality and there is a nervous breakdown, and that is characterized by all the physical symptoms that are given here. Mouth is parched, body is trembling, Roma harshascha jayate. There is a horripilation, and his skin is burning. He's not able to stand. Brahmati vache me manaha. Mind is swirling. He goes for a chakkar. He's not able to, it's like going to collapse. And that is what exactly is happening. Then what happens? So first, from a commanding tone, there is emotional breakdown. Then he is overcome with extreme sadness and pity. He tells Krishna, and I see adverse omens, O Keshava. I do not foresee any good in killing one's own kinsmen in battle. He is talking about omens. That is in what you call as shagunam also in Indian language, they say. Certain things that are happening outside you, you are able to correctly or wrongly, but emotionally you are connecting it to what your mind is projecting. So therefore you see everything wrong is going to happen. All this, sometimes you may go to the extent of even seeing ghost or something like that. All that is happening because your mind is in a totally a different frequency altogether now. And now he's saying that I don't see any good at all in killing one's own kinsman. Again, mark these words. He's saying kinsman, relatives. Okay. And then he is saying, I desire not victory, O Krishna, nor kingdom, nor pleasures. Of what avail is the kingdom to us, O Govinda? What avail are the enjoyments of life? See, the focus of Arjuna should be the war that he is fighting, which is the action. Suddenly he is talking about the results of the action, which should not be his focus at all. And he's saying that I desire not victory. See, to be equanimous and victory and defeat is a virtue, and that is what Gita is eventually teaching us. Okay, a person when he enters, let us say, a sporting arena, whether to play tennis or a Olympic discipline or something, you cannot start the sport by saying that I do not want to win. You cannot start a business and say that I don't want profit. The dharma of business is profit. The dharma of a sportsman is to seek victory. So exactly like that, you want really to win, and that must be the attitude that must be there. It is what is dished out at the end of it all. It is not in your hands. Sometimes you may win, sometimes you may lose, sometimes there can be a mixed result. And how you keep your mind equanimous and all these things, that is a different lesson altogether. But you cannot begin by saying that I do not desire victory. And this is not what Arjuna is really all about. He is talking to, he is expressing his emotions as it comes to him now. There is absolutely no clarity or thinking. He is just pouring out his emotions now. I do not want kingdom. First of all, what is the guarantee or get the kingdom? And nor pleasures. The duty of the king is not the pleasure. The duty of king is to serve the people. Chanakya's invaluable lesson to Chandragupta. Of course, we don't have detail to go into it. This is what is the duty of a king. And he's saying, I do not want the pleasures. And what are the enjoyments of life for? He goes one step ahead and says, these I do not wish to kill, though killed by them. Oh, Madhusudana, sort of a Gandhian principle he is saying. Even for the sovereignty of the three worlds, how then for the earth? Even if you give me Swarga, even if you give me other lokas, the sovereignty of all the three worlds, even that I don't want. What are you talking about? The small Hastinapur and a small kingdom that you are talking about. I don't want it. This is showing extreme pity and sadness that has overcome Arjuna now. So he goes into the mode of extreme sadness. Now, when his mindset is like this, that he is talking about not wanting kingdom, not wanting to fight this battle, wanting to take up sannyas or something like that. Now, once the mind is confined with certain ideas and ideologies, your intellect is now used to justify that stance. So, if at all people use the intellect, they only use it to justify the mind's emotions. So, intellect is held hostage by the mind. In that small circle, the intellect operates. And what does he now? Goes into the mode of theorizing. When a person is theorizing, that is what we need to understand the psychology here. When a person is having a problem, he never says that it is my problem or something is wrong with me. He always points out that the problem is with the world, problem is with others, and that is what I'm trying to address. And that is, so I don't want to fight this battle because I'm not facing a problem, because the problem is with the family, problem is with the society, problem will occur to the other world also. So he is actually projecting the problem in all areas except himself. Let us see what he says. These three verses are very interesting in first chapter, 40, 41 and 42. In the destruction of a family, the immemorial religious rights of family perish. Having lost spirituality, impiety indeed overcomes the entire family. So he says, because of this battle, there will be problem for all the families. Why? Because many people will die and therefore the family structure will collapse. And if the family structure collapses, they will lose spirituality. See, what he is not understanding is, it is not by a living or a dead person this has to be understood. Yes, obviously, when war is there, there will be loss of life, that is there. But family rights and religions that are rituals that are there may or may not perish because of the war. In fact, a just war can even re-establish dharma. So every family can reinvigorate and find their dharma after this war also. In fact, whatever Arjuna says now, whether or not after the battle it happened, that requires a separate study. But the point we need to understand in this context, or in the context of first chapter of Gita, is that Arjuna is not in a position to analyze all these things now. And that is not his concern at all in the present state. But all these things is outpour of his emotions. So now he says family will be affected. Then what he says, society will be affected. How is society affected? Because women are the custodians of dharma. That is why you have a term also called dharma patni, isn't it? There's no dharma pati. So even in any family, if the father goes astray also, there is chance for that family to regroup back. But chances are very difficult if the mother goes astray, because she is the fulcrum, she is the backbone, she is the main person around whom the family is revolving. So he says, by prevalence of impiety, O Krishna, the women of the family become corrupt. Women being corrupted, O Vashneya, there arises intermixture of caste. He uses the word caste in English because there is no better word as in translation. But the term used in Gita is Varna Sankara. Varna is different from caste actually. But let us use the term here for the convenience. So maybe because of battlefield and more men are participating, many menfolk will die, and because of which there can be corruption in the society. All these things is what Arjuna is projecting. And therefore, what will happen is there will be intermixture of Varna. All these things will happen. He does not stop at this level also. He goes to the next world. And therefore, what happens when all these things happens, people will not be able to perform the ritual that is required to satisfy the Pitrus or the ancestors. In Hinduism particularly, and generally in other customs and religions also, other civilizations in the world also, there is this ancestral worship. We have a dedicated Paksha also, Mahalaya Paksha, for that. And there are tithis once a year or once a month during Amavasya day also. We offer this pinda to the departed souls. And it's a very small ritual, but the essential aspect is that you are remembering the ancestors with gratitude, and you are as though feeding them. And then you are with that gratitude, you are also remembering that the values that they have left for us. So these are rituals that are helpful for us at all the levels of our personality. Very important ritual. So he's saying, if everybody is dead, then who will be there for performance of this ritual? Without our offering of the pinda here, the Pitrus who are there in Pitruloka at various positions that they are believed to be there, they will fall from there. So he's very, very concerned now about the forefathers also. So this is how the mind functions when you are caught up in extreme emotion, and when you are not able to confront the problem at that point of time, you shift the focus of the problem to somewhere else. And he is very clearly shifting the problem to the family, to the society, and to the Pitrus and other things. He is not ready to turn introvert and say something is wrong with me. What is the issue? That state he is not there now. He cannot be in that state because he is in outburst of emotions. So then what happens? He is now very clear. He is telling Krishna what we must do. So he goes into the answer syndrome. Arjuna says, therefore it does not behove us to kill the sons of Dhartarashtra, our relatives, Swabhandavan. This term, therefore, tasmat, he says, tasmat. This term tasmat is used by Krishna throughout Gita actually. Tasmat means therefore. The term therefore is used whenever there is a sequence of thought flow. Logical points are given, and after a conclusion of this logical sequential thought flow, Krishna says tasmat. In chapter 2, verse 27, he says, Tasmat apariharyate naktvam shochitum arhasi. Tasmat yasya mahabaho nigrihitani sarvasha. Like that, various places, Krishna uses this term tasmat. But Arjuna uses this term here with a illogical ranting. He says something and he says, finally, we should not kill the sons of Dhartarashtra. Not only that, he says, Aho, but a mahat papam. Alas, we are involved indeed to commit a great sin by preparing to slay our own kinsman. Again and again he is saying our kinsman, Swabhandavan, Swabhandavan. What is interesting is the person who is on the other side, Duryodhana, who never thought them to be Swabhandavan at all. Okay, still you can consider them to your relatives, but you have come to the point where you are confronting them in battle. Here, this is not the time to talk about relationships now. And he says, for the greed of pleasure of kingdom. Notice how the shift changes. Greed, jealousy, all this is on the other side. The personification of that is Duryodhana. He was not satisfied with it. With greed, jealousy, he acquired the kingdom of Pandavas. He sent them to forest. And Pandavas are rightfully asking for their kingdom. They were ready to even settle for 5 villages, like that it is. So where is the question of greed? Where is the question of even pleasure? It is their duty. And they were ready to negotiate to avoid war to all this extent. But Arjuna is saying, we are involved to commit a great sin by preparing to slay our own kinsmen for the greed of our kingdom. If the sons of Dhritarashtra armed with weapons should slay me unarmed and unresisting in battle, that would be better for me. This is the culmination. As I said, it's like a Gandhian principle. I'm not trying to attack Mahatma Gandhi here. He also started his journey with the foundation of Sanatana Dharma only. But he took an extreme stance of non-violence, which is not practically applicable. And it was imposed upon unsuspecting masses, and the effect of which is disastrous for the country. In fact, this principle is not new. Even Mahabharata talks about 2 nitis. It is talking about, let us say, Brihaspati Niti and Shukra Niti. Brihaspati Niti says, if a person, let us say, just to give it an example and explain, if a person slaps me on one cheek, then I must show the other cheek. If somebody asks for your dhoti and you give your kurta and towel, everything also away. Now, the analysis that we need to make is, will this actually work? Will this principle work in practical life? Answer is yes, it will work, but under given circumstances only. What is the circumstance? Suppose, for example, if a person is a sattvic person, a really a nice person, he for a time being lost his cool and he became angry and he said bad words or he slapped you or something. He is not really like that. For the time being, you also restrain yourself and you keep quiet. Immediately, that will bring about a change in the other person. He will immediately realize his mistake. When Sanat Kumaras go to the Vaikunta, Jaya and Vijaya are stopping them. They are not supposed to stop the Maharishis and Sanat Kumaras entering Vaikunta. For a moment, they lost their position and they said, no, you cannot go inside. Immediately, what happened was, the story is Sanat Kumaras gave them a curse. Once they gave them a curse, and in the commotion, Lord Vishnu comes out, the Dwarapalakas also realized their mistake. Sanat Kumaras also realized their mistake that they should not have cursed, because the transaction between these two people are essentially at a very high frequency. Both are of great level, great highly evolved persons. But for a moment, they could have lost their temper. So they regret. They say, I should not have done. This is the regret from both the sides. It will work that way. But in Kali Yuga, in the present situation that we are in, we have to worship Brihaspati Niti on a Saraswati Puja day and then keep it back. Mahabharata also gives us Shukra Niti. Shukra Niti says, which is what Krishna also adopted after all the legal means are exhausted. Finally, he adopted this. Maya charaha mayaya vartitavyaha. You speak the language of the opponent that alone he understands. So therefore, you know that what are the means that Krishna adopted during the war, because that was the only language that Kauravas understood. So he says, so a quote is attributed to Gandhi that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That is not so. If you take eye for an eye, then and there it would stop. Or we can go one step further and say that if you take two eyes for one eye, there may be more peace in the society right from the beginning. If a person slaps your cheek and you show the other cheek, and he keeps on slapping you, what is the end of it? Are you being rightful? No, you are only encouraging adharma. And this type of a non-violence is not really non-violence. You are encouraging violence. You are encouraging violence of the other person. Arjuna is taking that stance now. Even if even if Kauravas were to slay me unarmed, I am okay for that. And he goes into an extreme mode like that. He is then filled with tears in his eyes, and then he sits down. And in this answer, if at all in first chapter, if he asks any questions, those are just rhetorical questions, not real questions. Is it not like that, Hannah? Like that type of question. What does he say? For how can we be happy by killing our own kinsman, O Madhava? This is only, he's just, extending his stance, not a question here. O Janardana, why should not we, who clearly see evil in the destruction of the family, learn to turn away from the sin? So they do not see, we see it, we must run away. All this is telling Krishna what he should do. So not really questions. This is the picture of Arjuna in the first chapter. Arjuna's ranting also continues in the second chapter for a few verses, but there is a distinct change in his tone there. What is the tone? Now he expresses doubts and confusions. In the first chapter, there was no doubt at all. He was very clear. Now he expresses doubts and confusions. How shall I, O Madhusudana, fight with arrows against Bhishma and Drona in battle? They who are worthy of worship, Pujarha Varisudana. O Arisudana, how can I fight Bhishma and Drona? This is the real issue. The real issue is that Arjuna is unable to face his own grandsire, grandfather, guru, and others that he is not able to face because of his emotions. Forefathers, society, ladies being corrupt, Varna Sankara, all this is not his concern. His concern is this. And now, therefore, based on this, he is expressing his doubts. These are very direct words from Arjuna. Nor do we know which is better for us, that we should conquer them or they should conquer us. In the first chapter, he was very clear that they should only conquer us. Let me be killed. I am prepared to die. He was very clear. But now he is expressing a doubt, which is better for us. I really do not know whether we should win the battle or they should win the battle. with my mind confused as to duty, I ask thee. So he is asking Krishna with confusion. This doubts and confusion culminates in surrender. Now he says, my nature is overpowered by taint of pity. Tell me decisively which is good for me. Yat shreyasya nishchitam bruhitan me. I am not able to decide. Sorry. Shishyasteham. I am your disciple. Shadimam tvam prapannam. Prapannam or prapatti means surrender. Surrender is the hallmark of a disciple. In fact, Krishna is waiting for this. Unless otherwise a disciple surrenders to the master, knowledge cannot be imparted. Here we understand a very great principle of knowledge, that knowledge is never given, knowledge is only taken. I repeat, knowledge is never given, it is only taken. Not that everybody should come and fall at your feet, but they must show indication that they are prepared to listen to the knowledge. They are having that receptivity. In first chapter, Arjuna was not having that receptivity. Therefore, Krishna was maintaining silence. When he was not prepared to listen, how can any teacher give the knowledge? Rather, it will be counterproductive sometimes. It will bounce back upon you. So Krishna was patiently waiting. And now he is saying, please teach me, please instruct me, because I am not able to come to any decision. Having said this, Arjuna becomes completely silent. In fact, this verse is reported by Sanjaya. Having spoken thus to Hrishikesha, Hrishikesha is Krishna, Gudakesha is Arjuna, the destroyer of foes, the great Parantapa, said to Govinda, I will not fight. Na yotsye, uktva means having said this, tushnim babuvaha, he became silent. This is what will actually happen. Once the real issue has come about from you, there is no more need to talk. There is absolute silence that follows. And in that silence can happen a knowledge transaction. So therefore, this is the level to which Arjuna has come. So he started with a commanding tone, then there was an emotional breakdown, then there was sadness, then there was intellectual theorizing, then there was answering syndrome with rhetorical questions, then there was doubts and confusion. It culminated in saying, I don't know, and silence. In fact, our Swamiji says, our master, we have 3 years of course at Vedanta Academy. In 3 years, various texts are taught. But he says, if you learn only 3 words in 3 years, you have learned something in academy. And what are those 3 words? I don't know. That is the most difficult thing. Before anybody says anything, we know everything. I am telling you, no. Nanda solran. So in all languages, we know everything. When we know anything, when the cup is full, how can anything more can be added onto it? Only when you empty yourself can then something come. So it is an expression of humility. And it is not mere words, that feeling inside that maybe I'm lacking awareness. Maybe I need knowledge. Maybe I need to surrender to a superior intellect to gain this knowledge. It is at that stage can knowledge transaction can take place. You become like a sponge which can absorb water. So Arjuna is in that stage now where he is ready for knowledge. So if we analyze this, there is a gradual progress from they to us to me. First they, it is, what is this? Society and others like that. Us is it not Krishna? Should we not do like this? He is there. But finally he says, I am not able to face Drona and Bhishma. So it is coming down. It is narrowing down. It is boiling down to the real issue that there is something, a problem with me. From certainty to doubt to surrender. From answers to questions to silence. This is how the progress, natural progress should be there. So if you are a counselor, if you are a consultant, you have to patiently listen to that person and wait for him to outpour his emotions and come in and zero in on the real issue. Let us take, for example, a case scenario. An employee comes to a management consultant because he feels insecure for something. Okay. First, he says, my company is not professionally managed. In fact, they do not know how to use my talent. There is no job satisfaction. The job content is inadequate. The work atmosphere is not good. The problem is with the company. The problem is with the management. What is this? This is intellectual theorizing. Then he says, maybe I should shift my job. I should go to a better managed company, some other professional organization. This is answer syndrome. Do not interrupt him. Do not stop him. Let him pour out his emotions. Patiently listen to him. Keenly observe him. If you are silent, then slowly the issue of his insecurity will come up. Maybe there is reprisal going on. Maybe there are certain things that the company is going to take strict measures. He is saying, I am afraid now. Maybe I am not performing well. I am scared. Will I be sacked? That is the real issue. The real issue is that I am not performing well, or probably whatever is the level up to which I should be able to show my performance, that is not there. That internally I am feeling a little bit of insecurity. So will I be sacked? That is his concern. Therefore, because of that, I am agitated. Once you come to this point, clarity, precision, this is the hallmark. Precision is the hallmark of clarity. If you come down to that point, no more words need to be spoken. You have come to the core issue. You have come to the root cause of the problem. And this is the root cause of the problem. All other things that you said has no value at all. It is a rant. And how do we know that? Krishna dismisses the entire rant of Arjuna in half a verse. Not even half a verse. Half of half a verse. The famous verse where Krishna begins his lecture, he says, Ashocyanan Vashochastvam Prajna Vadamscha Bhashase. He uses Prajna Vadamscha Bhashase. You speak words of wisdom. Arjuna, you are speaking, you gave me a great lecture. Throughout first chapter, you gave me a great lecture. But what is that? Words of wisdom. So that means you only speak words of wisdom. You have no clue of what you are speaking. See, Lord Rama was prepared to take the coronation and become the king when Dasharatha announced. Next day, because of Kaikeyi and other episodes, he was called and said, you have to go to the forest. Ramayana says that he showed the same tranquility the next day also. He was as fresh as a full-blown lotus. That is how his face is described there. I am not definitely comparing Arjuna and Rama here, but Rama was not a man of renunciation. But what internally he showed was a sense of great renunciation. But what Arjuna is speaking is renunciation, but he is not prepared for renunciation. That's why all the time he is talking about enjoyment, pleasures. These are the things that are coming out of his words, out of his mouth. So Krishna carefully notices that and he says, you speak words of wisdom. Now, those who are studying Gita will have this doubt as to why is it that is a shift from first chapter to second chapter? If Arjuna is going to complete his rant, why not finish all the Arjuna Uvacha in first chapter only and let second chapter start with Krishna? Here we need to understand that Gita talks about various levels at which the intellect operates. Intellect is only one. Intellect is something which clearly discriminates, and that is called as a sattvic intellect. Sattvic intellect means the proper intellect, right intellect. But there are also other qualities of intellect or other manifestation of intellect called as rajasic and tamasic intellect, which are not really clear thinking, but state of mind. A state of mind which you may think as intellect. Chapter 18 gives this beautiful clear-cut analysis. For those who are interested, I think verses 31, 32 and 33 of chapter 18. It says, a sattvic intellect is that which clearly distinguishes between the path of action and renunciation. Pravritti and nivritti. Karya and akarya. What ought to be done and what ought not to be done. What is to be feared and what ought not to be feared. Bhaya and abhaya. Bandham and moksham. Bondage and liberation. In other words, every aspect of your life is clear-cut analysis and discrimination, whatever makes. That is a true intellect. That is the correct intellect. Setting aside your emotions, you are able to dispassionately analyze. That is the role of intellect, buddhi. But most of the time, when we have a rajasic buddhi or a tamasic buddhi, we may consider it to be intellect, but they are not real intellect. So the difference between Arjuna of first chapter and Arjuna of second chapter is that Arjuna shows the tamasic aspect of the buddhi in first chapter and rajasic buddhi in the second chapter. There is a shift that happens because here you see that tamasic buddhi is steeped in ignorance, sees adharma as dharma. In other words, there is sort of a clarity in tamas. Tamas and sattva mimic each other. They look alike, but they are world apart. So suppose if a person says, according to the law of gravity, apple should only go up, not come down, then what do you say of that? His understanding is perverted. Why does he say that? Probably he is hanging upside down. That's why he is seeing apple go up. His understanding is perverted because his vision is perverted. Like that, this intellect is perverted to see adharma as dharma. So running away from battle, all these things, he is very clear about it in the first chapter. That is tamasic intellect. But in the rajasic intellect, there is a confusion. It understands wrongly dharma and adharma. Erroneous analysis is there, and the conclusion could also be erroneous, but there is a confusion, and this is the state of Arjuna in the second chapter. So the shift of mindset from tamasic intellect to rajasic intellect, and therefore Arjuna's ranting also continues in the second chapter. Now the question arises, what brings about this mindset, change in mindset? Because Arjuna was clear, and then he was sitting down crying. To him, Krishna pokes him. He actually gives a very sharp words in verses 2 and 3. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha comes in these two verses only first. And he does not give any philosophy or answer. What is he saying? Kutastva kashmalamidam vishame samupastitam anarya jushtam asvargyam akirtikaram Arjuna. Whence has this dejection come upon you in a crisis, O Arjuna, which is unworthy of an Aryan, anarya jushtam, asvargyam, neither heaven, akirtikaram, not even fame. We look forward to happiness, and that happiness is of three kinds. Present happiness now, which is achievable in this world. Future happiness, which is indicated by the word heaven. Permanent happiness, which is self-realization. Okay. Now, Aryan is not a race as it is being taught in our schools. Arya refers to a very noble person, a gentle person, a person who is elevated in his thinking. Indians are supposed to be dedicated for the higher cause of realization. And that is why even in this TV serial like Mahabharata and Ramayana, you saw that kings and others are addressed as Aryaputra. That means they are being reminded of that they are dedicated themselves to this cause of self-realization. They are what to say, gentleman, yes, a noble person. Even Sumantra in Ramayana was addressed as Arya Sumantra. Like that it is. Okay. So it is not somebody as a race, Aryan, Dravidian, all this is a Western concoction. Okay, we are not getting into it. So a person who is worthy of an Aryan means you must have that quality to pursue that self. So permanent happiness, you will not get that also. Are you going to get heaven? Meaning I go through trouble now and future I will get happiness. No, you are not going to get future happiness. Are you going to get kirti or fame in this world now? That also you are not going to get, because people will only say Arjuna came, saw the battlefield and ran away from the battle. They will make you a very small person. They will, tease you. They will talk ill of you. They will talk very lowly of you. And then he pokes him further by using the term klaibyam, unmanliness. Yield not to unmanliness, O Partha, it does not befit you. Casting of this mean weakness of heart, arise, O Parantapa. Kshudram hridaya daurbalyam tektva tishta Parantapa. So, what should a counselor do is not just do not immediately jump onto the answer mode, even though you may know the solution. You have to poke that person so that the real issue comes out of him. So when Arjuna was crying and sitting in the chariot at the end of the first chapter, Krishna was maybe disgusted with him, but he obviously it is his friend. He knows him. He is very lovable to. He has that feeling to Arjuna. But he says, "Get up and fight, man. What are you? You are neither man nor woman. Like that you are behaving here. If you are a woman, you will be at home. If you are a man, you will fight here. Why are you coming, sitting here and crying like this? So it does not befit you, O Partha. Casting of this mean weakness of heart, arise, O Parantapa," he says. So this is a very fascinating lesson that we get from Krishna. that what we must do to a person who is now emotionally disturbed. You must create an environment by which the real issues should come up, after which Arjuna is saying, how can I fight Bhishma? How can I fight Drona? I am confused. Will you please teach me? To that extent it will come. So from this silence of Krishna in the first chapter and his counseling here, what do we really learn? What are the, so we conclude with this. What are the qualities of a good counselor, which we see in Krishna? That's why I said the philosophy of Krishna that he is going to give from 2nd chapter to 18th chapter is outstanding. I mean, each and every verse is a treasure that you can dig deeper and deeper and get like a gold mine, lots of gold. But first chapter shows the silence of Krishna. So even as Arjuna is ranting, you can feel Krishna is sitting next to him, standing next to him, whatever it is. And there is a pregnant silence here. And that silence itself conveys a lot of message. So what are the qualities of a good counselor? First, there is an intellectual clarity. So the person who is well versed in a subject, he knows exactly what that other person is seeking or wanting. Clarity is to penetrate through the body and see the mind, as it were. What is being expressed in words may be different, but what is inside must be caught. The quality of arjavam means straightforwardness, is when your thought, word, and deed are in one line. But Arjuna's mind is different. Arjuna's words are of very wise words. His body is trembling, he is shivering, Gandiva is slipping out of his hand, body is showing a different thing. So when this is not there, you are able to have an X-ray vision and see what it is inside. That is intellectual clarity. Then a counselor must have objectivity or strength. See, one is to have that clarity, but when somebody is coming out and pouring out that emotions to you, you must have that objectivity to not get involved in the problem also. That requires a lot of strength. See, it is said, I read a statistic about American study on suicides a few years back. They were giving various categories of people where they have collected data on suicides. The percentage of suicides among psychiatrists is much more than other categories. Let's say a student is there, athlete is there, various people are there, various people, categories of people commit suicide. But the rate of the frequency or the percentage with which the psychiatrists commit suicide is higher than the other categories. What could be the reason? See, psychiatrists are constantly listening to the problems of others. Okay, others are pouring out their emotions on them, but this person must have the strength to absorb it and not get affected. That is not there. So when all the problems become their problems, their mind collapses after a point of time, they become suicidal. Very sad. So you must have not only intellectual clarity, you must have the objectivity and the strength. Then this is very important. Do not jump to speak. Like Krishna, you have to maintain silence, patiently give a listening, because the other person needs somebody to pour out actually. So let him exhaust, let all the water flow through out. Then only you must make sure that real issue is brought out. Do not interrupt him. The moment you interrupt, he believes that you are not there for him at all. So it could be counterproductive. Fourth is very important. We may not have time to go into it, but observe the body language. Here also, I do not know because I'm not seeing the audience. Suppose if a person is constantly looking at the watch as I'm talking, and if I'm able to see it, I know that what is the quality of the speech or something, then there's an indication that it could be boring or something. It's a body language. So like that, you see whether the person is looking at you, eye contact, whether he is fidgety or not, or what is he doing. All these expressions of body language is a separate study and it will help a counselor. Lastly, maintain a sympathetic feeling. That is very important. After all, he has come to you for help. Maybe God has put you in a position that you are able to help him. And you have a loving feeling for him, even though Prahasanniva Bharata, even though the condition of Arjuna may evoke laughter, or it may evoke a sort of, what is this happening to Arjuna? A humor. But in and through, he maintains a deep feeling for Arjuna. He will not let down his friend. He will not let down his close devotee. So like that, whoever comes to you for help, you must have this feeling, and this is irrespective of anything, not just for a counselor, for anybody. But most important thing for a person when you want to help others is that feeling must be there, that I must help this person. So all these qualities that we see in Krishna is what is essentially the silence of Krishna. So to conclude, silence of Krishna in the first chapter is as eloquent as the words of Krishna in the rest of the Gita. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramaswamy. Kindly remain logged on for a couple of minutes for a few important announcements. And Bhagavad Gita lecture series by Sujati, a daughter disciple of Swami Parthasarthi, will be conducted online from 1st to 4th December, that is Tuesday to Friday, every evening at 6:30 Indian Standard Time. The topic is The Perfect Human Being, covering chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita. You are requested to register at our website, vedanta-kolkata.org, and please in India and abroad to register. It will be a great opportunity. It will be a great opportunity to get introduced to Vedanta in general and Bhagavad Gita in particular. I repeat, the website is for registration, vedanta-kolkata.org. Weekly study classes on Kaivalya Upanishad by Sri L. Ramaswamy has commenced. Those who are keen to attend may register through Advaita Academy website. Those who wish to contribute in any way to promote the work of Vedanta Institute Kolkata are most welcome to do so. We have a provision for the same in the same website should you wish to donate. All donations to Vedanta Institute Kolkata are exempt under Section 80G of Income Tax Act. At present, we can only accept donations only from Indian nationals. Social media handles of Vedanta Institute Kolkata are given here for your reference. You may wish to subscribe and follow these handles to get updated about our events. Vedanta Academy is hosting two major events in December. We have the International Vedanta Retreat and Next Gen Wisdom Summit for the youth. For more information, contact us at info@vedanta-kolkata.org. Finally, we thank Advaita Academy for co-hosting this online talk. On behalf of Vedanta Institute Kolkata, we thank the speaker, Sri L. Ramaswamy, for this insightful and inspiring lecture, organizers, those who have helped us in every way, and all the participants. Thank you very much. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Thank you. Namo Parama Shivaya.